Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where today we have two major lawsuits in Hollywood to discuss. But before we get into the specifics, I just want to point out that I think this might be the result of two things. First off is the raised profile of creators in the entertainment business. Everybody knows who J.K. Rowling is, Robert Kirkman, right? It used to be, if you were a super fan, you kind of knew who created it, right? And then, I think also the old school model was like Stan Lee, right? I mean, I don't think Stan Lee's getting huge paychecks off of all these movies, but, everybody, feels warmly about him. He does cameos in each of the movies. He gets to go on the convention circuit and do a lot of publicity, and his profile is raised, but in kind of like a distant relative, Grandpa Santa Claus kind of fashion. I think the feeling of ownership and also being a driving force creatively isn't really there. But you see a new group of creators having that situation. So I think that's one half of what's causing this. The other is that I think that the business of Hollywood is no longer as mysterious as it once was, right? I mean, I guess in both cases you're dealing with increased clarification, I think, thanks to the internets. But, it used to be Hollywood could say, I don't know how much money this movie made. Here, you want to take a look at my accounting? And it would just be a mess. I mean, it used to be that movies in Hollywood were infamous for never turning a profit because they just, gave all the money away before, as costs, right? So that there was never anything left. That's why you always had to say you wanted in your contract part of the gross, the box office gross, not the net, not the profits, because there never were any. But I think today, business in general can't get away with that kind of stuff. I think that you'll get hit with a lawsuit really fast. People don't have, I guess the feeling is there isn't a sense of powerlessness against big business anymore. People are like, I'll make you show me your books. And if your books are weird, I'm going to say that you're irresponsible in the way that you're financing and handling the money. And I think that stems from not only the internet and increased clarification, but also Hollywood has done this to themselves a little bit by really embracing business to consumer reporting, right? Again, just the mystique is gone. So that's led to two lawsuits that I think going forward are going to make studios really feel they have to be more careful in nailing down creator rights before moving forward with major franchises and investing so much money, because there's a lot of money at stake here. All right, so the first one is about the Conjuring cinematic universe, which, as we recently discussed on Movie Math, has now reached $1 billion worldwide in box office revenue. That's amazing. And those movies are so dirt cheap to make, they can't claim they didn't make any money. And they have 3 more movies on the way. This is not only has Warner Brothers been very successful with this franchise, but they have a lot still to go. So that's why there's a lot on the line here. As we've also discussed, 3 more movies coming up. The Nun, which is supposed to have a teaser trailer next week in front of it, also from Warner Brothers. Then The Crooked Man, and then The Conjuring 3. So those are all, coming down the pipeline. Now, what's the potential problem here is that the Warrens, these are all based on their case files. And James Wan has talked about the fact that, Warner Brothers has been wanting to do movies about the Warrens for quite some time. They knew this would be a cash cow. But apparently, biographer Gerard Brittle also felt it would be a cash cow because when he wrote a biography about the Warrens called The Demonologist, he had some kind of agreement with them that if there was ever a movie deal made out of it, that he would be cut in. Now, the sticking point here is that Warner Brothers says, well, we're not doing a movie based on The Demonologist. We're doing a movie based on what happened to the Warrens, which are real life events, and no one can claim ownership of a real life event. Whereas Brittle says, well, in my biography, I covered these real life events, so my deal stands. It's also a problem that, you have the Warrens, they're, it depends if you believe them or not. I think everyone could argue that they're a little bit of a sketchy couple, or at least an obtuse couple, maybe, right? So if you don't want to say it's nefarious. So, I wouldn't be like, hey, I guess I wouldn't take the Warrens at their word if they were like, oh, yes, I have total ownership of this. And so that's really on Warner Brothers and the producers. They should have been like, let me see your books and all your contracts, right? Or for that, I wouldn't put it past them to be like, yeah, we might have said this to Gerard Brittle, but let's just not mention it because we want this Warner Brothers deal. So anyway, Brittle has been trying to get a piece of this pie for quite some time, but he had a major win, and then a judge in Virginia has allowed the case to move forward to jury trial next year. Oh, we'll talk about that in a second. I think that's the worst possible scenario. It might not move to a jury trial, but it could. So anyway, one win for Warner Brothers, though, is that the judge removed a number of defendants from the case. Now it's just Brittle versus Warner Brothers, whereas before, parent company Time Warner was on the hook, James Wan, the screenwriters, and also Rat Pack, Brett Ratner's finance company that backs almost Warner Brothers' entire slate. So anyway, now it's just Warner Brothers left in this, mano a mano with Brittle. Now the problem is that this will be a jury trial in Virginia. That is like the last place I would want to be a big Hollywood studio coming in and going up against the little guy, right? I'd be like, how sleazy can we make Gerard Brittle look, right? Because I think that it'd be very easy for a jury of Virginians who aren't from Hollywood, right, to go, $1 billion. I think you should give Brittle a little bit of that, right? I mean, that would be really, really bad. But I could totally see that happening. And so I think if I were Warner Brothers legal team, I would be like, I do not want to go to jury trial. And will that entail cutting Brittle a check? I don't know. It's really difficult. The Warrens. All right. So anyway, I mean, there is $1 billion and hundreds of millions of profit, I'm sure, because that's just the box office. That's not even including all the revenue that these movies have generated from streaming, etc. So, and also there, all the other events they might be doing, theme parks, potentially rides down the line. It's definitely becoming a brand. So, I don't know. Do you cut them in? Will it ever end? It's a really difficult situation. If only it hadn't ever begun. All right, so that's the first story of the day, and I'm curious to what you think of it. Do you think Warner Brothers would do well in a jury trial in Virginia? And also, what would you do if you were Warner Brothers in this situation? And also, what would you do if you were on the jury? What would you decide? All right, so that's the first story. The second story I said is another lawsuit, and this involves the character of Jack Ryan by Tom Clancy, the subject of several movies, been played by Harrison Ford, Alec Baldwin, Ben Affleck, Chris Pine, and then now coming up, John Krasinski in the Amazon TV series, which I actually think is the best casting yet for Jack Ryan. But anyway, Tom Clancy's widow, Alexandra Clancy, his second wife actually, is suing because she wants the full creator payment. Whenever they do anything with Jack Ryan, they have to give a part of it to the owners of the character. And we'll talk about how that's divided up currently. But that's the case with anything that has someone who's a rights owner, right? I'm sure the Warrens are getting a paycheck. Well, only Lorraine Warren is still alive, but she's definitely getting money off of the Conjuring films. And so whenever you have something, just like Kirkman gets money off of Walking Dead, J.K. Rowling gets money off of the Harry Potter stuff, Wizarding World now at this point. So there are residuals that go. I mean, sometimes there aren't. Like that's why the Walking Dead lawsuit's going on that we discussed yesterday. But you're supposed to give a little, in whatever is determined by the contracts to the creator. So the whole problem stemmed from, you might be like, how is there any question as to whether or not Tom Clancy created Jack Ryan and has ownership? Well, Jack Ryan was a character he created early on in his career, and as we have also discussed many a time, J. Michael Straczynski said some wonderful business advice where he said you sign the best contract you can at the time, which means you don't always have a lot of clout. Like later on in your career, you might, you would look back at older contracts and be like, it would be ridiculous for someone to ask me to sign this today. But when Tom Clancy was starting out, he just wanted to get published. So the problem is that when Jack Ryan became a successful character, the original publisher, the United States Naval Institute, interestingly enough, was like, we own the rights to Jack Ryan because we published it. You don't. So Tom Clancy had to sue, and there was some resolution, but it was never fully resolved, as you can see, or else there would be no lawsuit. So right now, whenever there's a payment to the creator of Jack Ryan, a third of it goes to Jack Ryan Enterprises, which is like some third-party thing. I think that with the publisher maybe. A third goes to the estate, Alexandra Clancy, and she gets 80% of the estate, and her Tom Clancy's kids get 20. And I'm sure upon her death, the full 100 reverts to the kids. But anyway, and then the third is divided up amongst other parties. Like there's apparently a lot of people who have some claim to Jack Ryan. But anyway, if this lawsuit is successful, Alexandra Clancy will get the full payment, and those the Jack Ryan Enterprises, and then also all the other parties in that last third will get zilch. So we'll see what happens. It's interesting to bring this case now. I guess she wants to do it because of maybe the new stream of potential revenue from the Amazon series. Maybe she thinks John Krasinski is good casting too. But it's amazing. Look how long this has taken to be sewn up. This is still a problem since being published, the book originally in the 80s. Absolutely ridiculous. This is why being a lawyer is a time-consuming yet very lucrative business. All right, so those are the top 2 stories of the day, the lawsuits. And then for the third story, speaking of things taking a long time, I wanted to give an update on the Justice League Dark situation and how it illustrates how slow this business can move for people in it. All right, so anyway, as you might recall, I made a whole video about how a friend of mine at a recent industry event told me that the 2 finalists for the Justice League Dark directing gig were Gerard Johnstone and Daniel Espinosa. And as I totally knew, my friend was correct, because he's been correct on other things he's told me about the DCEU, etc. So anyway, and again, he told me this on the record, so I was able to report it. But it was confirmed when it was revealed yesterday that Warner Brothers doesn't like either of them. They were like, I just can't do it. I can't go with one of these guys. So at least Gerard Johnstone was able to move it forward a little bit, where he basically is going to get a crack at the script. They're like, nah, we're going to keep looking for a director, but you can work on the script, Johnstone, and we'll see what you've got. He's from, of course, again, New Zealand. I think this is pretty good for him, because if he does a good enough job on the script, if he can really knock it out of the park, and he shouldn't dilly-dally in his rewrite because they're looking for other directors. He wants to write something so amazing where they're like, wow, this is really impressive. This is better than I thought your rewrite would be. Maybe you can direct it. That's what I think should ideally happen for him. I'd also like to point out that it's very interesting that he was able to kind of like hang on, because we've discussed before that you'll notice that all the directors who work on the DCEU are from CAA, Creative Artist Agency. The Death Star, their offices again are called in Century City, because they have connections to, well, they had connections to the former head of the film department at Warner Brothers, but of course he was replaced by Toby Emmerich because he was running the division into the ground. But anyway, apparently those CAA ties are still pretty strong, because it's the CAA guy who was able to hang on, while Espinosa, repped by William Morris Endeavor, didn't, lost out and is totally out apparently. Maybe he's still in consideration. Maybe they could circle back to him, but it's interesting to see. I mean, I would like to think it's because Gerard Johnstone is so clearly the better choice for this project, but it's who is always a factor. All right, so the other thing I wanted to point out is that look how long it's taken Gerard Johnstone's career to move forward. This guy was the creator of a TV series from 2008 to 2009 called The Jackie Brown Diaries, not, spelled differently than, the Quentin Tarantino Jackie Brown. Then in 2014, so 5 years after that, he made a movie called Housebound, which is what has him on Warner Brothers' radar. And then 2 years after that, in 2016, it takes about maybe, 6 months to promote a movie, etc. So it makes sense that, 2016 isn't horrible for a follow-up. He was a writer on another TV series called Terry Teo, but he was just a writer. He wasn't the creator there or a director. And only now, in 2017, is he maybe going to direct Justice League Dark. So look how long it's taken, almost a decade, with very little work done during that decade. But hopefully it was the right work. So if you want to work in the entertainment business, I think the important thing to remember here is that you have to always be making progress. You can't be like, it's all going to happen overnight. I mean, it might be very slow progress, but you should be making progress, as Johnstone has been doing. But realize that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And that's one of the reasons that many people in the entertainment industry, when they start out, have second jobs that kind of like support them while they're waiting for their big break. Something to consider also if you're going to study to go into the film business, you might want to be careful about picking your minor. Although, again, you don't want a minor that's going to take up all your time and won't allow you to pursue your film aspirations. It's tough. It's a really tough business. All right, so anyway, those are the 3 stories of the day. And the viewer question. I wanted to also point out, some of you wrote some really great viewer questions in yesterday's comments, but they're too long. I have to read the viewer question out loud on the video. And if you make it too long, it's not going to be fun to go over. So I would tell you, if you have a question for me, and I'm glad that you guys are like so intense in your questions and you're thinking these through so much, that's fabulous. But if you want it to be picked for the show, you have to like keep it short, keep it to like a paragraph. All right? All right. So anyway, Giovanna Valente has a question. Giovanna says, "Hi, Grace. I have a question I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. What do you consider voguing? Is it just looking good or striking a specific pose? I think with more and more models entering the movie industry, we might be getting more voguing. Thanks for answering, and kisses from Brazil. Aw, hello in Brazil. That's lovely. So I use voguing as a term all the time in terms of specifically actresses. You very rarely see it with guys. Sometimes you might. But for the most part, it's when, in my opinion, an actress is very aware of how she looks. And so she's almost posing on camera, right? It's not like she's playing a character. You can almost tell that the person's like, I look really amazing in this shot, or it's important to me to look amazing in this shot. Someone who's famous for not voguing, actually a guy, is Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones. If you watch those movies, he makes the stupidest faces, and it's incredibly endearing and charming. And I think one of the reasons he's such an iconic action hero. Bruce Willis also never vogues. So yes, you can see it's important for guys too. And I think one of the great things about Gal Gadot, I mean, James Cameron's recent comments made it seem like she did vogue, but I think one of the great things about Gal Gadot, and even Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, is that neither one of them vogues, even though they both look fabulous. They seem to be totally unaware of how they look. So that's what I mean by voguing. And I think it's an unlikable thing to do, because it's like, oh, you don't care about the movie and the story you're telling and the character that you're trying to portray. To you, it's all about being a movie star. I think one of the few people who's good at voguing and gets away with it is Angelina Jolie. Not so much. I think people caught on to it eventually. But if you look at her early Tomb Raider work, it's super voguing. But I think it was voguing to such an extreme that it almost became maybe a caricature. And so it worked a little bit. And maybe because of the character of Lara Croft, it worked. But for instance, if you go look at Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns as Catwoman, she looks really amazing, but she's not voguing. I think you have to ask yourself, do I feel like I'm looking at the character, or do I feel like I'm looking at the actor in a movie? That's really, I think, what defines whether or not it's voguing. Now, the worst person of voguing that I've seen recently is Keira Knightley. She's just absolutely horrible. If you look at her in from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies to like Domino, she just vogues nonstop. I mean, the way she like holds her face, it's just really distracting. It's not good. And so I think that's hurt her career significantly, and why she never really moved forward. She got a little bit better like in The Imitation Game. That was a good breakthrough for her, but still, it's been a problem, and she just hasn't totally gotten over it. Now, the interesting thing is that Tyra Banks made a very good point about models, and I've brought it before, but I wanted to reiterate it here because it pertains to the conversation. And she said, the reason that models have such a hard time being actors is that they're trained to be very self-aware of how they look, because they have to pose for a photo. And often they have to do very exaggerated things, and they're supposed to stand out and get your attention, right? Whereas an actor is supposed to be part of the tableau, right? And I was like, wow, Tyra Banks, you really know the modeling business. Tyra Banks sometimes might seem ridiculous, but she really has a head for business when it comes to modeling. It's incredibly impressive, and it's why she was able to build an empire off of it with America's Next Top Model. But anyway, and she's an okay actress, actually, but she's not amazing. But she doesn't suffer from that, perhaps because she's aware of the problem. But anyway, I would say I thought it was interesting that you said, Giovanna, that more models are entering the movie industry. Maybe in Brazil, I'm not sure, but in the United States, not so much, actually. And you can always spot them in a movie. Like, for instance, in Wonder Woman, there's like a couple of models as Amazons. You can totally spot who's a model Amazon and who's a professional athlete Amazon. It's super easy because it's just the way they carry themselves. And I think they all look good, but I think that the athletes look a little bit more realistic, to be perfectly honest with you. And also you have to remember, there's like models, like models, which are really bad with voguing. But like, for instance, Gal Gadot is really more of a beauty queen, and I think that is a big difference. So if you have someone come up through the beauty contest circuit, they don't have the same problems that models do. Maybe because of the personality part of the competition. Maybe that helps them make sure they come across as real people. But anyway, I don't see a lot of models in the business, and even when they do get a movie role here or there, they never really move forward. They're just the quote-unquote model in the movie. Like, look at Rosie Huntington Whitley from Transformers, right? Longtime romantic partner for Jason Statham. I don't believe they've ever gotten married. But anyway, she tried to be an actress, didn't work out. So you always see actresses kind of getting a shot here and there, but it never really works because they just can't get past seeming, I think, like mannequins instead of real people. And that's really, I think, the bottom line. But I think it's great that so many actresses are not doing that, and you get someone like Gal Gadot, who is a perfect example of what you should do, while still looking fabulous. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below everything in today's top 3 stories, Giovanna's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions, of course, that you might have. Thanks for watching.